Welcome back to the Commercial Connections podcast. Today we're doing another Multifamily Minute where Rene and I unpack trends we're seeing across the Eugene Springfield market and answer real questions investors bring to us every week. One trend that keeps surfacing is this: family partnerships where one sibling wants out, another wants to stay in, and everyone wants to avoid unnecessary taxes. Today, we're walking through a true case study from a local investor. We'll call him Mark.
We are seeing these trends everywhere. So in Mark's situation, there's a total of 4 siblings, by the way. So one sibling wants liquidity, one sibling wants to buy the other partners out and hold on to the portfolio. And the other sibling could go either way. She's like, hey, whatever you think is best, I'll listen to you. And then Mark is focused on preserving long-term wealth for the next generation. No one wants to trigger a major tax bill or create family friction. So the real question is, what's the cleanest, calmest, most strategic way to restructure this partnership?
And it's so relatable for so many families. Real estate works beautifully until goals shift. And I'm really excited to hear about this client. So, when a partner says, I'm ready to exit, what are the actual options?
So there's really 3 clear directions or paths that he could follow. They could do a cash out refinance. The properties continue to stay within the family, and the sibling that wants to exit could get some cash because, one of the siblings wanted liquidity and cash. The other option is they could come out of their family partnership into their individual names, and then they could split up and each family member take a property. There's a total of 5 properties. So 4 siblings, each one gets a property. And then the 5th property, they could sell that and use that to fund liquidity. It's hard when you're trying to sell 5 properties to have them come out even. So that 5th property could balance whoever is getting more in real estate and less in cash, or vice versa. So you could sell that one property from the portfolio to generate the liquidity needed to separate out and make it even. Then the third thing that you could do is you could do a thing that we call swap agreements, where basically siblings are trading ownership interests. So each person ends up with a property that supports their goals. Out of 5 properties, there's probably one of them at least that is super easy to manage. And that one may be one that the person that wants liquidity and out, he or she may still want to consider looking at that, so that they don't wind up having to pay capital gains on how much money they're going to receive. It always sounds good to say, gee, mom and dad built this portfolio, then they passed it on to us. We're now in our 60s and 70s. We're retired. I want my money. That's really easy in your mind to think, I just want my money because I want to go retire. But when your CPA tells you what the tax consequence is, it's astronomical. Sometimes it's as high as 29 and 30% for a tax consequence by the time they factor in both capital gains as well as your personal state income tax. So selling and pay capital gains may not be the right answer for that one sibling who just wants liquidity and wants out.
So, let's talk quickly about what these siblings want out of this deal.
Really, everybody has a different strategy or a different thing that they want. The brother that wants to stay in, he wants to go do cash out refinances so he can just pass cash across the table to his 3 other siblings, but he gets to hold the real estate portfolio because he's really familiar with it. He likes the portfolio. He's not ready to give it up. And I don't know age-wise where he falls, but the other partners or the siblings, one of them is definitely saying, I just want cash. I want out. And then the other 2, Mark, my client, is trying to plan for generational wealth. He has adult children. Those kids are going to want to start funding their kids' college educations. And so really everybody has a little bit of a different motivation for what they want to do.
Yeah, I think having everyone come together and find what feels right for them and speaking to the experts is the best, smartest thing they can do. So I'm really glad they came to you. And if you're listening to this and thinking, I need clarity on my own partnership or portfolio, René is now offering a free pinpoint price valuation. We also have the 2025 Eugene, Springfield, and U of O market snapshots available. These are reports, snapshots of the local area that we put together with comps, tools, guides, things that can help you figure out where you are positioned in today's market, especially if you're considering a buyout, refinance, or partnership restructure. So let's get back into the story about Mark. So he's thinking about his generational wealth. Let's talk about his strategy for that.
Yeah, initially he was thinking that he would just sell and pass that all on to his adult children. But if you look at the IRS rules, IRS generally wants to see a minimum of a 1 year holding period before deeding properties into individual names, whether you're changing your family partnership or you're going to 1031 exchange into a property and then you want to start deeding that to your kids. By making sure that you do this correctly, that preserves future 1031 exchange eligibility, which is essential for your long-term goals if you're really focused on generational wealth. Well, and not even just generational wealth. I have literally seen people cry when they have to cut a check to the government for their capital gains because they know that they're having to pay this in order to get that cash, but they're also remembering and reflecting how many tenants they had to screen, how many lawns they had to mow and paint, and just, a lot of them rolled their shirt sleeves up and earned it. And so you want to make sure that you are doing a 1031 exchange correctly and that you are not creating any tax consequence.
Yeah, because there is a time period where not only what you're saying about having to hold the property for 1 year, but also we've talked about in the past where people have come to you right at the end of the 1031 exchange window.
Yeah. And I can tell you horror stories. I actually had a similar situation last year where a couple of sisters were all getting ready to depart and split their family dynamic up and take some were taking cash, others were 1031 exchanging. And I kept telling them, you need to call escrow and talk to them. You need to talk to your exchange facilitator. And literally, just a couple of days before closing, one of the sisters had a judgment that popped up because she was going through a divorce. And we had to scramble to fix that problem before we could close and they could complete their 1031 exchange. So you really owe it to yourself to get in the game early and start talking to an exchange facilitator and or your CPA.
So, how did you get in contact with Mark?
Mark has been one of my former clients. He owns a lot of property in the University of Oregon area. I check in with him either quarterly or at least every 6 months just to find out what's happening with his properties. And then he said, hey, I've got this opportunity where I've started talking to my siblings. We may want to make a change with our family partnership. You're familiar with all of the 5 properties, but I'm not sure what I want to do. And I'd really like to get the money tax free. How do I do that? So that's when I listened to his story. And basically, what we have to do to start with, the easiest thing is to know the value of the property. So I had completed pinpoint price evaluations for him over the years. And to me, it's just like going to Kelley Blue Book and blue booking out your car. It gives you a really clear snapshot of what the value of your property is based on what other properties are renting for. So the other thing that we also then look at is what debt did he have on the property? Well, for his situation, he didn't have any debt. But if you're doing a 1031 exchange, you have to go even or up in value and even or up in debt. Now, David Moore, who is a friend of mine and literally the 1031 exchange guru, will tell you that if you don't take on the same amount of debt, let's say you originally had $1 million loan and you just don't have the stomach for it and you're going to slow down, you want less debt, you can take on less debt. That just gets factored into your tax consequence when your CPA is calculating your tax. So we say even or up in value, even or up in debt, because it's easy for people to understand that conceptually. But if you say, no, I'm going to do a 1031 exchange, but I'm not taking on any debt, you can do it. You can still do it. It doesn't null and void your 1031 exchange. It just makes a difference in how they calculate it. So that becomes a tax positioning strategy. And the siblings that are looking at the options, they're basically trying to decide who's going to stay and who's going to exit. And once you see the whole picture, then really the strategy becomes obvious. The one sibling that just wants cash and liquidity, a lot of it's going to depend also on what state she lives in, because in Oregon, I think the state tax right now is 9.9%, but she may live in a tax-free state. So there's some other things that get to play in there when you're looking at tax positioning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What would you say are one of the most like frequently asked questions when you are dealing with a group like that?
Their concern or fear is that they're going to make a mistake and cost themselves huge tax consequence. So I'm going to build a caveat here and say I'm not an attorney, I'm not an estate planner, and I'm not an exchange facilitator. So what I like to do is connect people with those right people. That's one reason I named the podcast Commercial Connections, because I feel like I'm literally within a Kevin Bacon 6 degree separation of knowing the smartest person in the room. That's either the attorney, the real estate attorney, the CPA, or the exchange facilitator. And they're the experts that are going to help you listen to your wants and needs and what you're trying to accomplish. And then they're going to guide you through to make sure you don't make a mistake or cost yourself unnecessary capital gains.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why this trend is growing. Why do you think you're getting a lot of calls about this and people are wanting to get more information about DSTs and 1031 exchanges and how to reduce their tax consequence?
Yeah, Mark is also dealing with broader market pressure that we are hearing about constantly and that we're seeing on a day to day situation. So, shrinking cash flow, they're having to manage the manager. Definitely tougher landlord laws. Oregon just set the new rent increases for this next calendar year. You used to be able to raise rents 10% or less. Now it's 9.5%. So we're still seeing rent control constraints. And there's student sensitivity with enrollment trends. When all that piles up, owners start looking for a simple, more predictable structure than having to stare at the ceiling in the middle of the night and wonder if they're going to be able to keep their units full.
So when we talked about this property before, when we talked about Mark's situation, we talked about that he might have an interest in a DST. So at what point did the option for a DST come into the conversation?
Well, I do not hold the proper licensing to have discussions about DSTs. That takes a Series 6 or a Series 7 license, which is the equivalent of a financial planner. And so, what I like to do is when somebody wants to know a strategy about a DST, I refer them to David Moore, because David is an exchange facilitator and he can walk them through how they could 1031 exchange into a DST if that's a good fit. And that's not always the right fit for people. So for Mark, he said, I want my kids to inherit something that they won't have to manage. And a DST does give him passive income, tax deferral, predictable distributions, and a clean, simple inheritance path. But the drawback is, and I could hear it in his voice when I did the conference call with David Moore and Mark, when David said, well, you could go into a DST, but you're going to be probably locked into that for 7 to 10 years. And Mark's in his mid 60s. That wasn't super exciting to him to be locked in, to have his kids basically locked in for 10 years without being able to do something different with the property. If you 1031 exchange into other property, whether it's a single family property, a duplex, or lease commercial, or a triple net property, you own that piece of real estate. And so you can sell and 1031 exchange as many times as you want on that. You can do a cash out refinance. It just gives you a lot more flexibility to actually buy real estate. So for owners who are just so frustrated with tenant landlord laws, dealing with tenants, probably what they're looking for is that ease into commercial real estate, potentially like owning a Dollar General or some type of a triple net property where they just get mailbox money. That's what most people want as they're heading into retirement. They just want a check in the mail.
Yeah, this is becoming a huge trend, especially for owners who want income without the management for all the reasons you've said today and that we always talk about here on the podcast with other guests that have come onto the podcast. And we got to have David Moore back on for sure.
We
I
do.
want to hear what he's up to.
I know. I just felt so lucky to be on that call and hear what he was advising Mark and his wife about, because I knew the information because I've just dealt with David for 30 years and, I'm pretty steeped in this information. But it was great to hear him walk Mark and his wife step by step through the process. And I could just hear Mark kind of breathe a big exhale of relief when he realized, wow, getting rid of a family partnership does not have to be messy. A lot of people think, oh, this transition is going to be tough. But ironically, all four of the siblings are ready to make moves. So you can support the sibling who needs liquidity. You can honor the sibling who wants the stability and still protect the family's long-term strategy. It's doable.
And when you plan with intention, everyone feels respected. Even if there's been bad blood in the family before, which we've talked about, and everyone knows that could be the case when dealing with family. It's a very sensitive topic, but when you plan intentionally, everyone feels like they got the piece that they needed.
That's so true. And, for a lot of people, it makes them happier because nobody wants to be in a partnership with somebody that you want to go one way, they want to go the other way, and then it just creates a lot of strife. And so here are the 5 truths that I want any owner to take away is number 1, start with your portfolio, not a single property. You really need to figure out what your total value of your properties are as a portfolio. And we do look at them individually as single properties, but what you want to do is look at the big picture. Because like in this family partnership, there were a total of 5 properties in the portfolio. So we didn't want to look at just one property. We wanted to look at everything and how those were built in. And then number 2, swap agreements often create the cleanest outcome. Well, in this situation, for what I would call the swap agreement, we're going to lay out all 5 of these properties, and then we're going to look and say, okay, who wants to pick up the first piece? What property? And it's probably going to be the brother that wants to do the cash out refi, because remember, he's the guy that wants to keep all of the properties. So he's probably going to go for his favorite. It's almost like playing Monopoly. He's going to go for his favorite piece first. And then the next sibling gets to, you look around the room and say, okay, who wants the next property? And some people are going to sit there and say, oh no, I just want a get out of jail and a cash. That's all I want. But the third thing is, for the truth concept, is you could do a cash out refinance and you can use those funds. So the brother who's staying in, he could do a cash out refinance of one of his properties and pass a sack of cash to the sister who just wants liquidity and she just wants to be cashed out. So doing a cash out refinance, you can buy out partners that want to go. You can just do a cash out refi, buy out partners. And number 4, it gives you the ability to protect your 1031 exchange options, but structure and timing matter. You have to do it in the right format. And you really need to talk to a 1031 exchange facilitator who's an expert about that. And then the 5th thing is that legacy should guide the strategy. You didn't get this far by accident. So you really want to make sure that you are thoughtfully putting together these final stages in your strategy so that you really pass your legacy on the way that you want to.
Yeah. And if you find yourself thinking, I need clarity on my own partnership or portfolio, Renee is offering those pinpoint price evaluations for free right now. We also have the fall 2025 U of O market snapshot and the 2025 Eugene Springfield apartment snapshot available. If you'd like to check those out, you'll find all of those resources in the show notes so you can understand exactly where you're positioned in the market today. And if this episode was helpful, we'd be so grateful if you'd leave us a quick review on Apple Podcasts. You can also subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. You can leave us comments or questions if you want us to answer those in the next episodes. We also are doing a free giveaway right now. So if you take a screenshot of your Apple podcast and send it to us in a DM, we will do a monthly drawing for a chance to win a copy of Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. We recommend this book because often his negotiation principles apply directly to multifamily investing, especially when you're navigating offers, inspections, and partnership conversations. His advice gives owners a clearer, calmer approach to negotiating in today's market. And we just think that information is invaluable. So we're so happy you could join us today. And we hope to see you again. Thank you for listening in on our new segment of Multifamily Minute. And we'll be back with more commercial connections. See you soon.